Okay, so hello everyone and welcome to our first video blog installment of the Lessons from Leaders series. And I'm super excited today because we've got a man who, when I first met you, Tug, in 2015, doing a rugby course. I just also happened to have seen a film about you, Kajaki, which is a film you all must see. And when we cooked up this series for the blog, we're really looking for examples of people who've been in situations whose experience can really tell us a lot about mental skills. So it's my complete pleasure to welcome Tug Hartley, who is a former military medic and recipient of the George Medal for events that we'll get onto in a moment. So Tug, firstly, how are you doing? How's this strange, crazy world treating you? How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thanks. Yeah, obviously everyone's been sort of touched by the COVID pandemic, but thankfully I've got my family with me, so I'm getting a bit of time off work, which is great. So Lovely. It's all good.
Yeah. Nice one. So we as we just discussed now, what I think it'd be cool to do is just to learn a little bit about you and your story, and if you don't mind, just to take us through the events of that day in September 2006 in Afghanistan, and just what I'd love to do is just pick your brain a little bit about the mental and psychological aspect to these situations, because Apex Mental Skills are really trying to see what good looks like when it comes to good team performance and great mental skills. So let's start at the beginning. How did you take us back to when you were 16, 17? How did it all happen for you? How did you find yourself there on that day in the first place?
I'll start a bit earlier, to be honest. From school.
Right.
Going back to the good old days when we had chalkboards and things like that. Wasn't very academic at school.
Right.
Always sort of knew I wanted to join the military. In class, I sort of found myself falling further and further behind, and it wasn't until years later that I got diagnosed with dyslexia. And because of this at school of them days, you were just that sort of kid who messed around in class. It started off with putting your hand up and asking questions, and you start getting a bit of peer pressure and embarrassment, so you stop asking questions, and then you sort of fall further and further behind. And I remember when I was 14, I had my careers advice meeting with my year head, and he told me by the time I was 19, I'd be dead or in prison. And, being honest, I packed my school bag and I never went back. I left school at 14-year-old and spent the next couple of years working on my mum's fruit and veg stall in the market up in Huddersfield, where, being honest, I probably learned more about life than I ever would have at school. And I did that until I was 17. And the reason I chose 17 to join the army is I didn't want to join as an apprentice or a junior leader. I wanted to join as a man soldier. So I was 17 and 2 weeks old when I enlisted into the Royal Engineers. I spent about 5.5 years in the Royal Engineers, where I specialised in mine warfare, demolitions, and communications.
Sorry, that's an interesting bit that I don't think I've ever known about, given what did happen at Kajaki. I didn't know you had
it's sod's law, isn't it?
Prior. Yeah. That's incredible. Right. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Yeah. For one reason or another, after about 5.5 years in the Royal Engineers, I decided to transfer to the Royal Army Medical Corps, become a combat medical technician. I transferred across in 2003, September 2003, and being honest, I absolutely hated it. It was a terrible decision.
Why did you decide that anyway? What motivated that?
There was a number of different reasons, family reasons, the way the military was going. There was a number of different things where I wanted to be sort of geographically located within the military and things. And so I put my chit in, I transferred across, did the training, and got posted to Colchester with 23 Air Assault Medical Squadron. We were attached to 16 Close Support Medical Regiment. And as I said, I hated it. I had no love for medicine. We weren't very pragmatic in medical training. It was all about being fit, keeping up with the paras and not letting the regiment look bad, rather than it was the medical skills, where I was quite keen and interested in the medical side of it. Arrived there in early 2004 after my training. I'd been there about a month, and I was deployed to Afghanistan back in 2004 to support the Green Howards. I was with the Green Howards for about a month, and then I was selected to go and work with 22 SAS, who were currently training the Afghan anti-narcotics team, a place called the Fort in the sort of north of Afghanistan.
Okay.
Had a great tour, loved it, came back into the cycle of being in a regiment, and day to day, iron increases in uniform, shaving every day, all the sort of boring bits that people underestimate about the army.
Yeah.
Completed a number of sort of exercises, and then in sort of mid 2005, we got the warning that 3-para battle group was part of our brigade. We're going to deploy into the Helmand. They called it the invasion of the Helmand and the Triangle of Death and all the other propaganda stories they gave. And our mission was we were going to go out there and eradicate all the poppy fields to stop the opium being spread across the UK and America. So mid 2005, we started doing a lot of training. We deployed out to Oman and started training with the sections and the companies from 3-para, and we started then sort of knuckle down and realised that we were pretty weak when it came to the medical sort of side of it. We were fit, we were strong, but we just weren't very good medics. So that changed pretty quickly. And then in early, I believe it was April 2006, we deployed into the Helmand as 3-para battle group with the first sort of boots on the ground in the south of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
It had not been done before. My early role there was to establish Camp Bastion and set up the field hospital and everything that was there. And then from there, we started got deployed out onto the ground, taking what they call FOBs, forward operating bases, over. I believe the mission statement for the battle group when we went there was to take over 3 forward operating bases. By the time we'd left, we'd taken over 7. So we were extremely short on manpower and equipment, and obviously with war and how it evolves, you know, you're always going to be short of equipment and things. Yeah. I then fractured my wrist. I fell over. I'd been out on an operation, had a successful operation, came back, and I was walking into the accommodation and I tripped and broke my wrist, and I got aeromedded.
Right.
Got aeromedded home. I'd been home for a couple of weeks. My wife, my fiance at the time, and I decided we were going to get married, and we sort of planned the wedding. And the day after we planned it, I got spearheaded to go out to Cyprus to support the conflict in Lebanon. Wow. And I was over there, and I managed to get a flight back and land the day before my wedding, which was quite fortunate.
Nice, yeah. And
thankfully, we've been married 14 years, I believe, just gone a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, it's all good.
Congratulations.
So got back, got married, sort of shotgun honeymoon on the Monday, phone call Wednesday, Friday I was back on a flight back to Afghanistan. Arrived in Afghanistan, and because of the sort of hassle I'd gone through and everything, my boss at the time decided to send me to this sunny place called Kajaki where nothing really happened. So I boarded a helicopter and flew down to Kajaki sort of mid-July, and he was right, nothing really happened. We sunbathed every day, we went swimming in the dam. Sometimes on a night we had a little bit of an argument with the Taliban and things, but it was, when you got off the helicopter, you left all your morale inside it because there was nothing to do. So the Kajaki Dam area is a hydroelectric dam which powers the whole of the Helmand province, and it was quite a key strategic sort of place where the Taliban wanted to target and take control of. So we were there as a show of force, and we had a couple of little things go, but nothing massive. And on the end of August, beginning of September, we'd planned to do our first patrol into a village called Tangi, which was just sort of down to the south of where we were. We wanted to open the bakeries and the shops and things for the locals, and we were going to bring the Mujahideen in to support. And we'd got all our kit and equipment packed, and we were due to go in on the 7th September. I remember that date vividly because that's my birthday. And I remember on the morning of the 6th September sort of checking my kit and make sure it was ready for the next day. Every day we used to get up and we used to go down the dam, and we used to have a wash and a bit of a swim and a bit of a mess around. And I remember the boys coming and getting me, and for some reason I decided I didn't want to go that morning. And obviously being a medic, I got a lot of abuse and jip for being a minger. Washing, I sort of planned I was going to go down later on. And I was just sorting my kit, make sure it was ready for the 7th. And I was looking forward to it, to be fair. And where we were situated, we had 3 sort of hill posts, and one of the other hill posts had identified the Taliban, had set up an illegal vehicle checkpoint, and they were extorting money and beating and what looked like executing civilians. So they made a decision that a small patrol of 3 men were going to come off their hill, walk down into the wadi, and then up onto a small ridge, so the sniper in the team could eradicate the threat of the Taliban, as it was. Unbeknown to them, as they walked down into the old riverbed, the wadi, Stu Hale stepped on a mine and amputated his left leg.
And this is how far away from where you are at this time?
So it's about a K1.5, but within that K1.5, you had to come down off our mountain, up another mountain, then down the back of that mountain. So it was a bit of a jaunt, to be fair. So yeah, it was about 11 o'clock, and we got the call that there'd been a mine strike incident. I remember grabbing my kit. Thankfully, it was all packed, and I was in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. So I just stuck my Desi boots on, grabbed my rifle and my kit, and off we went on what seemed like the run of forever. You know, my kit was weighing about 65 to 70 pounds.
It's pretty hard rifle. Keeping up with paras on that jog. They're pretty good at running up hills, aren't they?
Pretty gopping, mate, to be fair, especially when it's one of their own that's injured. You know, I've never seen blokes who sort of commit to each other as much as they do. And I'll be honest, there was times I was falling behind, and every time I fell behind, I was getting a lot of verbal abuse, which kept me going and fueled me on. And I remember getting to the top of their hill and looking down and thinking, I'm just going to roll. You know, it's I've never been built for running, but we cracked on and we got down there. And luckily for Stu, there was another lad there, a lad called Private Harvey, or Jarhead as he's known. He was with him on the patrol. He'd done immediate life-saving treatment on him and managed to stem pretty much most of the bleeding. There's 10 of us who set off, and 10 of us went in. And while we were sort of in the minefield trying to look after Stu, a number of others came and sort of give us false protection and put a sort of cordon on around us to protect us, which was good. We got Stu pretty much sorted, to be fair. We stopped the bleeding. We'd identified he was missing a finger and things like that. We got him treated. It was pretty good. We'd wrote up all the notes. We were just waiting for the helicopter to come in and rescue him. And then we made a decision. We looked around us and sort of the topography of the ground of where we were in the wadi for a helicopter to come in with a winch. It wouldn't have worked. So we decided that we needed to move him to slightly higher ground, but not too high, because we were concerned that if we were to carry him and the stretcher was not to stay flat, especially with the ground we were on, that there was a chance that the clot could burst and he would have bled out. So we moved him to a small ridge, but to get to that ridge, we needed some volunteers who get on their belly and clear a safe path for us, bearing in mind it had just been identified as a minefield. So 2 of the boys volunteered. They got onto the belt buckles and they got the bayonets out, and slowly but surely they crawled through the minefield, prodding for mines. They identified a couple of mines en route, and then eventually they sort of got us to where we needed to be. There's myself, 4 others. There's a stretcher party. We picked Stu up and we carried him across the safe route, got him onto the sort of high rise, and we were in a good place. We decided, myself and Mark Wright, who was sort of commanding the incident at the time, decided that myself and 4 would stay to load him onto the winch when it came down, and that everybody else should leave. And as they all left, the very last one to walk back on the path where Stu Pearson, he detonated a mine, stood on a rock and slipped, and he detonated a mine, taking his leg off. So that now created a big sort of gap between where I was. It's probably about 15 to 20 metres away from where I was. And I started to make a decision that I needed to go over to him. But luckily there was another medic who was on the 3rd ridge who'd heard about the incident, and he'd made his way across, a guy called Alex Craig. And Alex had just arrived at the minefield as Stu had detonated the mine. So Alex jumped in and started to treat Stu. So we've now got the 2 Stus 20 metres apart, both with lower limb amputations.
And sorry, Alex is a medic in the same way that you are. So you,
so Alex,
senior medical person, almost.
Yeah, so me and Alex had served together. We were both medics. I was slightly higher rank than what Alex was at the time. He was on a different. There was 3 outposts, and Alex was on one of the others. But he'd heard the mine strike happen, and basically he'd run for about 5k, bless him, with his kit on. And luckily he got there just as the 2nd Stu detonated the mine. Alex got to work on him. He was fantastic. Again, probably saved Stu's life. At this time, I'd not really done much treatment. I'd put some fluids into the 1st Stu. readdressed his tourniquet, sort of dressed it up and made him as comfortable as possible with a bit of morphine and things. Alex had now done the same with the second stew. We'd been there for probably about 2 hours at this point, and it was hot. It was horrible. It was about 58 degrees at the time. It was sandy. There's flies, and because of the blood and things, it was pretty gopping.
Yeah.
You know, we only had the water that we were carrying for ourselves, which isn't a lot. And eventually, we could hear the sound of a Chinook helicopter, which is a very distinctive sort of sound in the distance. And there's a thing called in Afghanistan at the time, there was two things. There was the HRF, which is the Helmand Reaction Force, which is a bunch of para-reg guys who come and secure the ground. And then there was the MERT, which is the Medical Emergency Response Team, which is a surgical capacity helicopter. So it's full of doctors, surgeons, paramedics, anaesthetists, etc. So we presumed it'd be one or both of them. Again, the sound of a Chinook's very distinctive, and we could hear it getting closer and closer, and we thought it'd drop at the HLS, the helicopter landing site, and the guys would get off and come in. But it wasn't to be. The helicopter came round and it sort of passed us through the wadi, and then as it came back on its second path, it hovered over us slightly, and then about 75 metres to our north, it decided to land, but it landed on its back wheel and ramps. Fantastic flying by the pilot. The loadmaster came to the rear and started to wave us on, and because we'd now got the two shoes and we knew it was an active minefield, you know, between us all, we made the decision we weren't going to try and carry them that 75 metres, and we tried to signal as much as we could for the helicopter to take off. You know, like we were doing the YMCA at times, I think. And eventually it took off. In my whole time in the military, I've seen thousands of Chinooks, and every time they take off, they sort of nosedive and go forward. For some reason, this one backed up over the top of us, and as it backed up over the top of us, we got what's called a brownout. So the sand fills the skies. You can't see past the end of your nose. And as that was happening, you got the down pressure coming from the helicopter. You got sand going everywhere. It's really, really loud. I noticed a number of mines detonating, and they were detonating above head height, waist height, leg height. They were detonating everywhere. It looked like a scene from Star Wars, to be fair. And that's been taken out of the film, being honest, because the film was made to be non-political, so apolitical.
Did you ever understand why the helicopter did do that?
No.
Okay.
Looking back at photographs and things, maybe because of the topography of the valley and things that we were in, it might have been hard for him to sort of manoeuvre. It was just one of them things. It was one of them days that went from bad to worse, unfortunately.
Well, we'll come on to that in a bit. Anyway, carry on.
So as the helicopter's now sort of disappearing and the sound's settling and everything, I looked over to where the second stew was, where he was being treated by Alex. And Mark Wright was pretty close to them, sort of running the command and control at the time. And Mark and Alex had both laid over the top of Stu to try and protect him from the downforce of the helicopter. And as the sort of dust settled, I could see that Mark had been hit, Alex had been hit, and Stu had taken a second hit. One of the flashes that I'd seen had obviously detonated pretty close to them. It was silent then. There was a big lull of silence. It seemed to go on forever, but in reality, it only went on for a couple of seconds. And I remember Mark sitting up, sort of screaming, saying, "Tug, you've got to help us." Alex was in a terrible way, and so I knew he couldn't carry on. And there was a point in me where I knew how dangerous it was. I recognised the threat, and sort of ran through every sort of scenario in my head again, in a flash. But it seemed forever at the time. And I remember bending down, and there was a rifle on the floor, and I grabbed the rifle between the trigger and the rear stock, and a thought went through my head that if I picked up the rifle, it'd be easier if I just executed all three of them. It put them out of their misery, and it'd mean no one else would be putting themselves in a risk. I still remember to this day the coldness of the weapon, even though it was boiling hot. It was just different to the atmospherics we were in. And as soon as I touched it, as soon as I had that thought, I realised that I couldn't do it. I'd have to go and treat him. So I pulled my Medbergen from under the first stew's leg, and I picked it up and I threw it, and it didn't go bang. So I jumped onto it and slid it out from under my feet and repeated it and kept repeating it. And I got about halfway across, and I remember stopping. I remember looking back at where I'd come from and looking forward to where I'd go in and thinking, "Do you know what? This is terrible. tomorrow it's my birthday. It's also my son's first birthday, and I'm stuck in the middle of a minefield. Sod's law, if I go back, I'm going to get it. If I go forward, I'm probably going to get it as well. But I still rather try and out them guys, and I slid it out and I threw it again. And as I'm sort of making my way across the minefield, a young fusilier, a lad called Andy Barlow, or Ken as we knew him, he'd come in and started providing first aid to the guys who were there. Ken was a bit of a mess. His head had gone. I think Ken was only 18 at the time, by a couple of weeks, and the pressure had got to him. I was trying to control Ken and trying to direct him in what he needed to do, but his head had gone. And as I got probably about a metre and a half away from them, I went for my final sort of pull to throw the Bergen the one last time before I was with him. Ken had called for some water to give the guys, and one of the guys on the outside of the minefield threw in a bottle of water, and Ken stepped to sort of pick it up, to catch it, sorry. Ken then stood on a mine as well, taking off his leg. I remember being lifted off the floor and being sat on my backside, and again there was a small brown out, so I couldn't see anything. I remember looking down, and I was bleeding quite heavy from my shoulder and my arm, and I remember thinking, if this is what it's like to be dead, it's not that bad. I couldn't hear anything, I couldn't see anybody, I had no pain from where I was bleeding from, and it was all right. And then all of a sudden I got a burning sensation in my chest, and I remember thinking, I'm alive. And at that time I wasn't sure if I was happy to be alive or not. It'd have been easier to have died because I wouldn't have had to go for any further forward. But on the flip side, they were my guys and I had to look after them. So I picked my Bergen up, didn't bother throwing it again, and just walked over to them. I'd sort of decided at that point that I was probably going to die that day. And if I was going to die that day, I wanted to die, try my best. And I managed to get to them. Luckily, and I don't know how or why, the way they'd fallen when they'd been hit, they were laid in pretty much a triangle. So Mark Wright's feet were by Stu's head, Stu's feet were by Andy's head, and it's sort of nice and comfortable for me to get into the middle and be able to treat them. Stu had been hit twice, both lower limb injuries. One was an amputation, one was a bad sort of wound on the other leg. But he was able to sort of self-treat himself, which is good, with a bit of direction. So giving him equipment, telling him what to do, which again keeps his mind focused rather than thinking about what's wrong with him. Andy was in a lot of pain. I remember giving Andy some morphine and a tourniquet and sort of directing him how to use it. But Mark had also been hit twice now, because he'd been hit by the one that had hit Stu second, and then he'd been hit by the one that Andy had unfortunately stood on. So I spent most of my time treating Mark. We'd now got to probably three and a half hours into it, and everyone was okay. Stu was in and out of consciousness, kept coming round, having very sort of strange.
That's Stu Pearson, who you're with,
Pearson,
right?
Yeah.
And Stu Hale at this point is stable.
He's still on the high ridge, still stable. He's having a lot of problems because he's now blaming himself for the other guys being injured.
Yeah.
Stu Pearson sort of in and out of consciousness, hallucinating quite badly, to be fair, but that's because of the heat. He was concerned about his camera, he was concerned about a can of Iron Brew, but he's Scottish, I can forgive him. Mark was pretty much there, all of it. Andy was in a lot of pain, kept screaming for more morphine, but at this point I'd now run out of all my medical equipment. I had nothing left. And I remember Andy screaming and saying, it's not working. I was saying, it is working, mate. The more you scream and shout, no matter how good that tourniquet is on your leg, your heart's going to beat faster. If your heart beats faster, your blood's going to thin, it's going to come out that hole, mate. So you need to be quiet, otherwise you're going to die. And there was no more treatment I could do than be frank with him and tell him. And it worked. And unfortunately for Andy, several hours later, when they got him back to the hospital, they realised he was immune to morphine, and none of the painkillers had worked for him for the whole time he was there, especially me telling him off as well. But he was strong, he was strong, and he survived. And, I spent most of my time with Mark, and then it was about 6 hours in total. We were there now. We'd gone through a lot of really bizarre things, getting him to sing happy birthday to one of the guys who got a bit of shrapnel, Dave Prosser. And the reason I got him to do that was nothing to be nice, because the Power Rage boys aren't nice to each other in any way. It was to test their levels of consciousness and communication skills and give me an understanding of where they were at. So I knew who I'd got to work with. And we did that several times. And a lot of honesty chats, you know, if things go wrong, please tell my families this, etc. But you're always trying to convince them that it's going to be okay, which is quite difficult, because sometimes you've got to, you know, it's not going to be okay, and sometimes you've got to tell a bit of a porcupine. But yeah, we got to about the 6 hour mark, and we heard the sound of Black Hawk helicopters coming in, which the Americans had at the time. The British didn't have any. And again, they did a circle above the top of us. And as they came in for the sort of second run, American PJ parajumper, which is their equivalent of a medic, fast roped in. And I remember him fast roping in, and he got a big 7-foot metal stretcher with him, and he was sort of dragging it around on the floor. And I remember screaming at him, "It's a minefield, it's a minefield." And he just gave me a thumbs up. He got a big mask on so I couldn't see what he was saying. Just give me a big thumbs up. And he started to pull all the guys out, and they took, I believe, Stu Hale went first on the first one. The rope come back down. Stu Pearson went on that. And then as the second helicopter came in, the rope come down. So we put Andy Barlow onto that one, and then they come down with the stretcher a second time, and I lifted Mark on. We had a bit of a brother hug, and as he got sort of winched up, I remember just being covered in his blood. I felt like I'd had a shower. It just come off him, and they got into the helicopter and they flew off. The helicopters ended several passes, and as they came back round, they picked up the guys, the stretcher bearers, everybody was sort of with us, and sort of evacuated them all. And I had about 5 minutes on my own in the minefield, sort of looking around at where we'd come from, where we'd been, where I was at now. And at this point, I was still sort of convinced that I was going to die that day, which seems really surreal. And I remember thinking, I could be knelt on a mine, and when the winch goes round me, when they lift me up, I could detonate it and take the helicopter. And I remember eventually the helicopter came, and I put the winch on, and I lifted up, and I remember closing my eyes, just expected it, and nothing happened, and it was really, really strange. And I got into the Black Hawk. I remember the parajumper gave me a bottle of frozen water, and it felt so nice. And but I still thought we were going to get RPG. I thought something was going to happen. It was really, really bizarre. We then flew round to the helicopter landing site, and I got off the helicopter there, and I went to climb onto the back of a stripped down Land Rover, and as I did, a bit of blood squirted out from my shoulder, and I had an adrenaline down in. I threw my guts up. I got picked up by the scruff of the neck, thrown back onto the Black Hawk, and got told I was going back to Camp Bastion to the hospital to be treated. I got in the helicopter, and all the way back in the helicopter, I kept seeing that scene from Black Hawk Down where, you know, he goes on the microphone saying there's a Black Hawk Down, there's a Black Hawk Down, and kept expecting an RPG or something to come, but nothing came. And eventually got back to Camp Bastion. I got off the helicopter. A good friend of mine, who was another medic at the time, Gary Lawrence, he was running the ambulances from the HLS to the hospital. And as I got off, Gaz sort of picked me up, put me in his ambulance, and drove me to the hospital. And when we got to the hospital, there was like a reception committee where the officers sort of line a path going through. And I remember walking through it, where normally the officers were all quite chatty and chirpy and everything. Not one of them spoke to me. And as I sort of made eye contact with them, they all sort of put their head down. And I kept thinking I'd done something wrong. It was really a real sort of horrible, sort of gut-wrenching moment. I got into the hospital, and one of my young private soldiers, a guy called Stevie Parsons, just looked at me and burst into tears. I'm saying, "What's up, Steve?" He says, "We got told one of the medics had died." I was like, "No." He says, "Well, Alex had come in, so we knew it wasn't Alex, and you were the only one out there." I said, "No, mate." And it was basically they were all thinking they'd seen a ghost. I eventually got into the hospital, and as I got in, I could hear Dave Prosser going absolutely mental. He was knocking trays and curtains and things over. He was proper going off on one, screaming, he's died. And I was like, "Mate, I've not died, I'm here." And he said, "No, not you, Mark. Mark's died." And Mark had got onto the Black Hawk, he'd gone unconscious. The parajumpers had revived him, and they then got him onto the Mert. And his last words were, "Are they all safe?" The doctor told him, yeah. He closed his eyes, and that was him. I think he died about 7 minutes away from Camp Bastion Hospital. Speaking to the surgeons and everything afterwards, Mark shouldn't have survived for the time he did in the minefield, never mind the time he did out of it. The injuries he sustained were absolutely phenomenal. But if it hadn't have been for his sort of leadership and his courage and the fact he kept going, I don't think many other people would have kept going either. You know, and, I've seen some very heroic things in my time, but on reflection, never seen anybody as heroic as what Mark Wright was. It was unbelievable.